We're doing a composite of 4 extremely interesting, intriguing, complex, but very exciting books. Now, I'm going to say the first name of the book, and most people are like, oh boy. And I bet you it's because they never ever read it. One of those books is the book of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. How many of you guys have ever read all 4 of those books? Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. How many say, John, you know what? I'm getting ready to do something brand new. I have never read these books, these 4 books. Raise your hand. Again, being honest in church, I have never read these books. Guess what? That's why we're doing this, right? And for the rest of us who raised our hands, well, I've read it. I bet you boring was the word that you just didn't say out loud, all right? You're like, oh, how long are we doing? I hope this is one of those 3-week series, not the whole, right? No, we're going to find so much truth that we sing about, so much truth that we say that we believe and understand in the New Testament. We're going to understand why it's written in the Bible through the course of this series. I hope that you will find that it is not dusty, but in fact it's very alive and very, very important that we understand these things in the Scriptures. Well, we're doing it for a reason, but I'll give you that intro in just a second. I wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up what is going to be coming starting next Sunday. Those of you who've joined us in these series over the course of the last couple of years, you know that in these sort of studies, we'll have what happens on Sunday morning, the message that hopefully it penetrates a little bit deeper than beyond the surface for us, but starting next Sunday, we'll be passing out daily readings that will walk us through these things. And if it was boring or confusing before, if you started to read through it and you're like, this is just so much, well, I would encourage you to find yourself time in the Scriptures. We're going to be passing these out, and you'll get to have them as daily readings. Some of you will choose to participate in groups. We'll have a study group here on Wednesday nights. There'll be small groups in homes, and you can go a little deeper, not only with the understanding, but also the application. Learning the Word of God is the singular critical difference maker. Just saw another statistic over the course of the other day about discipleship, that reflection on Scripture, reflection on the Bible, is the #1 predictor of spiritual growth. Not going to church, not singing the songs. Reflection on the Scripture is the #1 predictor, the indicator that spiritual growth is on its way. So it means if we're doing that, it means something's happening. If we are not, it means that the chances are much stronger, are much weaker that our faith and our relationship with God is going to grow. Why? Because our influence is not with the Bible. Our influence is with other things, and we'll talk about that today. So, a year ago, January, we began what I've been looking at it as a trilogy. We began a trilogy of studies that looked more deeply into the beginnings of the large story of God. We started with the Bible's first book, which would make sense, that January, the book of Genesis. And that fall, we followed it up. So a year ago right now, we followed up that study from Genesis into the book of Exodus, right? And today we're going to begin the 3rd and final leg of this trilogy. And we're going to launch into this larger story, and it's continued in these very complex, very difficult to understand, and certainly very difficult to say, does this apply to me? Does this somehow matter? Do I worship different because I've read this? And this is a complex, but it's exciting, this world between Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. And many stories, if you'd have grown up in church, you'd be familiar with a lot of the stories in the book of Numbers, which we're going to start with today, and the book of Joshua. Most of the things we have some kind of Sunday school-esque familiarity with, but hopefully we're going to find that they live in the adult world. They live in the big boy and the big girl world, and how that really matters. So we started out in Genesis a year ago in January, witnessing God making a promise. Appreciated that they customized today's worship experience, talking about that God is a promise maker and that he's a promise keeper. Well, we're going to find out how he starts to make that promise and keep it. But he makes a promise to Abraham that he wants to be a blessing to him in profound ways, but he wants to be a blessing to the world through him. He will bless him so that Abraham and his family can be a blessing to the whole world. And one of the ways that he would bless Abraham's family was to give them a platform from which to bless the rest of the world. So it wasn't just like that he was going to give him a little bit more money or a little more fame wherever he was living. He intended to bring him back to a place. He was going to bless him and his family, but he wanted to bring him back to a place known then as the land of Canaan. Known to us probably today, you might call it Palestine. Some people call it Israel. We're going to call it the land of promise, because this is what God had set aside for Abraham, his family, and all of his descendants. This is the place from which God's people would reach out and bless the world. So it wasn't to build the walls. If you pay attention today to the place that they call the Holy Land, or Israel, or Palestine, it's mostly they're building walls around it, aren't they? Building walls around it. That was never a part of God's design. Of course, we live inside of a very real world. His intention was for it to reach and transform the world. Well, by the time that this promise to Abraham had come out, I'm going to be a blessing to you so that you can be a blessing to the whole world. At this point, the book of Exodus, or Genesis ends and Exodus starts up, and where we find that Israel, that promise to Abraham and his family, doesn't seem anywhere close to being fulfilled because they're living in slavery. They're in the land of Egypt there. It seems as far away as possible. How could they bless if they were in bondage? This is the core idea that we tackled this last fall on our way into this particular study. Well, of course, Exodus walks us through God's deliverance of his people out of slavery, and he takes them out into the wilderness where he takes them to a place, and he's doing all these kind of miracles. He walks them out of Egypt. He parts the water so that they could escape. He gives them even miracle sustenance of water from rocks. He gives them bread from above. All kind of miracles happen, and there's just a couple of them. Well, one of the final movements in that particular book that we learned from last year that we saw in Exodus is the beginning of the giving. The beginning of the giving. Okay? The Ten Commandments were not the only parts of the law. He begins to give his law, his covenant. This is how we would live if we lived together. And part of that was the Ten Commandments. And one other part of this that can't ever be overlooked. The book of Exodus ends with this on purpose. The book of Exodus ends with the holy God, Yahweh, the creator, the one who'd been talking to Moses in a burning bush, the one who had been speaking to Abraham so long ago, 500 years before. He comes and he indwells, he lives inside of and above a tent that they had set aside sacredly for him. What we know now today in the scriptures as the tabernacle. That's how the book of Exodus ends. The book of Exodus ends. These are things you have to know. So if you weren't here last January or a year ago January, these are the things, just basic ideas that you have to understand. There's a promise that's not been fulfilled yet. I'm going to be a blessing to you so that you can be a blessing to the world. But the story's not complete because Israel, when you end the book of Exodus, is way out in the desert. They're sitting at the foot of a dusty mountain we know today as Mount Sinai, awaiting the green light. Awaiting the green light from God to move into the land of promise. They're waiting for the story of God and the promise of God to finally come true. Well, the orders come in. So if you have a Bible, I want you to turn to the book of Numbers. Okay, way at the front, way towards the front. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. It's the fourth book of the Bible. Again, those first 5 books are the Torah. That's how the rabbis refer to it as, the Torah. And this is the fourth book of the Torah. Numbers chapter 10 is where we're going to start out today. The green light to make their way into the land of promise. Numbers 10, we're going to begin in verse 11. There's been a lot of story and some things, some counting off of who's in what family, who's the leader of this and that clan. That's kind of what's gone on in Numbers up to this point. Well, we get to chapter 10 and the green light happens. In the second year, after Israel's departure from Egypt, on the 20th day of the second month, the cloud, and the cloud there we would know already at this point means it's God's presence. It's Yahweh himself. The cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the covenant, that tent where they worshipped him. So the Israelites set out from the wilderness of Sinai and traveled on from place to place until the cloud stopped. It had moved them. It stopped in the wilderness of Paran. When the people set out for the very first time, following the instructions the Lord had given through Moses, Judah is one of the 12 tribes, Judah's troops led the way. They marched behind their banner, and their leader was Nahshon, son of Amminadab. Their leader was Nahshon. Now, if you're paying close attention, part of this may come as a surprise to you. Who is not leading the group at this point? Moses is not. Moses is still alive. He's alive and well. He's supposed to be a part of the crew bringing these folks into the land of promise. Moses is not leading the movement toward the land of promise. A guy named Nahshon is. How many of you guys have named or have cousins named Nahshon? There's Moseses all across the world. There's no Nahshons. Why is that? Well, if you were here over the course of the last year and a half, we've been doing a study, especially in the book of Exodus. You would have found something here and would remember potentially what the tradition that tells us about the guy named Nahshon is, why he's this guy. The Jewish Midrash, and that basically it's not the scriptures. We have the scriptures in hand. The Torah is as it is, these first 5 books. But the Midrash is a sequence of historical, traditional studies that the rabbis built around. They were passed down orally, and they started to write these things down. And these are the stories about the stories. And Nishan has a set of his own stories. Well, the Midrash identifies Nishan as a big character in the story of the parting of the Red Sea. Maybe some of you guys remember if you did the study or you were here when we did the book of Exodus. The Midrash teaches that when the Israelites reached that definitive moment, that definitive Red Sea moment, right? The Egyptian army is rushing down on them to destroy them. Contrary to popular belief, the waters didn't just automatically part. If you watch it, the cartoon versions, I think, in fact, in America, he, kind of like he's Gandalf. Moses hits the staff down, and the water goes like that. Or some of them, he lifts his staff up high, and according to the Midrash, that's not how it goes down at all. It doesn't go down like that. So the army is crashing in. He's lifted his staff, and everyone's like clinched up looking at him and looking at the water and looking back, and they're like, what's going on? It's kind of like one of those weird hitches in a movie. The climax doesn't happen quite when you expect it to. That moment doesn't arrive when expected. He had lifted his staff, Moses did, in obedience to the command, but God had told him that there was something else he had to do before those waters would part. He lifts up the stick, and all we hear is crickets chirping. People getting very nervous. Moses had done that part, but he had not done the one part that God had also told him to do. He was to get the people moving. God said, Yahweh says to him, get the people moving. Now, if you're Moses, and the army's coming, you've got your staff, and they're at the edge of the water, at some point you're saying, how many more inches are we talking about? Well, Nishan, according to the Midrash, the story about the story, he's looking around, he's looking at Moses. Moses got his thing lifted up, and so you know what Nishan does? He jumps in the water. He goes in, he wades in the water, and it says, in the tradition, it says when the water got up to his nose, the water parted. It was Nishan jumping in with his courage. Somebody's got to jump in here, get the people moving. And so he jumps in, and that's what Nishan's story is. Well, once this happens, Nishan is a person of courage. He's an example. He's a leader, and so he begins to take on this kind of role. And you see in every example in the Bible that he gets brought up, he is leading by his example, by his voice, and by his actions. Courageous leader, a courageous lay leader of the people. So they're making their way from Mount Sinai a little over a year after they've made their way out from Egypt, and they're making their way now from Mount Sinai all the way to the land of promise. And Moses says, Nishan, hey, God's moving us into the land of promise. Do just exactly what you did when the water parted. So the story continues with Nishan at the lead. Look at chapter 10, verse 33 now. Numbers 10:33. This is they, meaning the people of Israel. They marched for 3 days after leaving the mountain of the Lord, with the ark of the Lord's covenant moving ahead of them to show them where to stop and to rest. As they moved on each day, the cloud of the Lord hovered over them. And whenever the ark set out, Moses would shout, "Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Let them flee before you." So that he would wait while they would camp out overnight, and then the next day he would say it's time to move. And when the spirit would, when the cloud would move, let your enemies flee before you, God. And Nishan would say, let's go. And they'd start walking. This is how the story is going on. Israel was marching through the desert, as the kids say these days. The kind of attitude that was present here, Israel was walking through the desert, like kids would say, like bosses. All right? That's kind of what's going on. We're moving from Israel, or from Mount Sinai. The cloud of God is above us. Nishan is leading us just like he was before, and we're walking through the desert like bosses. We see things happening. It's coming close. It's so close. Israel is going to leave the wilderness behind with even greater boldness than they left Egypt behind. Only a year removed from the Exodus, now they're making their way in. Okay. That's the update of where we're at. If you know even a little bit about about Israel, what is your guess that happens next? Now, most of you would know, and I want you to answer it out loud. How long does Israel stay in the wilderness? How many years? Is it 1? It is 40 years. They're just days. Days from the land of promise. It lasts 39 more years. If you know anything about Israel, you know what kind of people they are. Day one, Nahshon is leading Israel through the desert like Harold Hill, in leading the marching band through the music, in the Music Man, right? Day two, young Israelite boys are trading cards, all right? Trading cards with their personal dream team, their fantasy leagues about who the favorite soldier is, who's be leading these armies into the land of promise, right? That's what's going on day two. Day three, a little bit parched, but they were still moving. Enemies of God, definitely, you want to get out of the way. Day three. Day four, yeah. Hold on. This is a little harder, a little longer. It's not quite as exciting as day one. We like when Nahshon, was, a little more march to it. Getting a little thirsty. Numbers 11 happens. Verse 1. Soon the people began to complain about their hardship. And the Lord heard everything they said. There's a lot to preach in that. I can't today, but there's a lot to be said for that. They complained, and the Lord heard everything. Then the Lord's anger blazed against them, and he sent a fire to rage among them. In Exodus, he'd have been merciful. In Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, he is not. He is a straightforward relationship. Obey or don't. The choice is up to you. It says he destroyed some of the people in the outskirts of the camp. Then the people screamed to Moses for help, and when he prayed to the Lord, the fire stopped. Moses intercedes for them. After that, verse 3 says, the area was known as Taberah, which means the place of burning, because fire from the Lord had burned among them there. They marked that place real seriously, because day 4 was not a good day, and it got worse when they complained. Verse 4, here now, catch this, because this is where we're starting to get traction. It says, then the foreign rabble, this is the way the Bible describes it, the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt. Let that sink in for a second. It's going to get worse. They began to crave the good things of Egypt, and the people of Israel also began to complain. Two different groups. One is the outsiders among them who weren't really people who were buying in, and then the people of Israel themselves. They complain, and here's what they say, and you can tell it's definitely guys that's leading this charge. Oh, for some meat. It's definitely guys that are complaining here, right? Oh, for some meat. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt. And we had all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic we wanted. I don't know how that's a good thing, but now our appetites are gone. All we ever see is this manna. In this passage, we see two notable things, a humorous part and a very concerning part. The humorous part of the complaint is how ridiculous that it is on a couple of levels. We wish that we could go back and eat so good like we did back in Egypt. What else did they have in Egypt? Chains. They had chains. They were slaves. That's what they had. Boy, we ate good back when we were slaves. That's what they're saying. What else is humorous, yet has to be the most offensive part of this of all, is their actual complaint. Oh, if we could just have some meat. We're tired of this manna. One, it's a provision. It's a miraculous provision. But the fact that they're complaining about not having meat. This is a strange one because students of the scriptural language and the traditions that talk about this story point out the irony that these people have with them huge flocks of cattle and sheep. They're bringing them from where they were, just like they've been walking them all the way through. They have gigantic flocks of sheep and cattle right then, but because they kept getting this manna every day, they just would kind of eat it but then hold on to the cattle. They don't slaughter the cattle and eat it. They have meat at their disposal, but they don't want to slaughter it for a meal. They're complaining about not having what they have. Does that sound or feel like anybody you know? I am tired of not having all the stuff that I've got. I said it last week. I try to say it every time I get a chance. Our poorest in America are they among the 8% richest in the world. We don't have enough. You have everything you need. So there's just a problem built in. There's a baked-in problem because we're complaining about not having the very thing that we actually do have. It's these people that stir it up. There are complainers in this thing. I don't know if you've ever been around a complainer before. Anybody ever been around a complainer before? Anybody sitting next to a complainer? All right. It brings us to this second and what would amount to be the more concerning part of this passage about God's people. The concerning part is the who of it. The who. These complainers. A growing core of the people of God are starting to let outside influences dictate their views, their state of heart, their state of mind. The complainers aren't Israelites. The starting point complainers are not. The starting point complainers are not Israelites. They're tag-alongs from Egypt who rode the wave, rode the momentum, and Israel's mojo while it was going on. For a year, God's doing these massive miracles. He's leading people out. And there are some people who sort of see the writing on the wall, and they join in. They follow Israel right as they make their way out of the land of Egypt, these tag-along people. But now, a couple of days in, Nishan's magic isn't working. Where's he at? I thought, shouldn't he be up the front? Where's he at? Who are we going to talk to complain to? It starts to get a little dusty, starts to get a little thirsty, and the mojo is starting to wane. And guess who starts to talk? Boy, it was a lot better in Egypt. People. It was a lot better in Egypt, they say. And they start complaining and talking about heading back to their homes. We want to go back to what it was. At least there we can get some leeks and cucumbers. Some people just don't get it. There was a group of Americans that were touring Ireland. And one of the women in the group was a real curmudgeon, just a real whiner, a bellyacre to the core, constantly complaining. The bus seats are uncomfortable. The food is terrible. It's too hot. It's too cold. The accommodations are absolutely awful. Just a bellyacre at the core of who she was. Well, as the tour made its way through Ireland, the group actually finally arrived at the site of the famous Blarney Stone. The guide comes up and starts to talk about this. Good luck will be following you all the days of your life if you just kiss the Blarney Stone. Unfortunately, the Blarney Stone apparently is being cleaned today, so you won't be able to kiss it. But maybe we could come back tomorrow. To which the complainer on the bus says, we can't come back tomorrow. We got another boring tour we got to take. So I guess we don't get to see and kiss the Blarney Stone now, do we? To which the guide responded, well, now that's a pity. But they say if you kiss someone who's kissed the Blarney Stone, you'll have the same exact good fortune. To which the lady says, oh, so you're going to want us to kiss you, right? That's what you want us to kiss you because you've kissed the Blarney Stone. No, ma'am, but I've sat on it. Sometimes it's just, you got to just say, complaining, shut up. Stop. Get out of here. Kiss the Blarney Stone. All right? We normally see them for what they are. And soon enough, with a complainer, we'll probably just start to move on. Because if they're that way at a core, at a DNA level, it's going to show up in everything they do, including when they start to turn on you, right? My concern from this passage in Numbers chapter 11, because it's very human, and God intentionally leaves it here, he puts it in the story for us to understand, is the influence, this influence that they have on seemingly and otherwise good people. This initial group, the outside group begins to influence the body, and there's a segment of those people who begin to say, you know what, you're right, I sure miss some leeks. I miss some cucumbers and some garlic as well. I'd like to have some fish back in Egypt. And there's a group of people who there's a little bit of groundswell that grabs on. And amazingly, even though this rabble was more like the Jerry Springer crowd, right, that's the kind of segment we're talking about here. The scripture actually uses the word riffraff. This is the word that the scripture says it is. It's rabble, but it's called riffraff. This rebellion did still catch on with that Jerry Springer-esque crowd that's everywhere. But here's the deal. Not all complainers are obnoxious like that, like Jerry Springer kind of people. Some even are well-meaning. Some even are well-regarded. It is one thing if Jerry Springer says this is the way it is, all right? Some, but not many, will take notice. But if Colin Powell says the same exact thing, more people will take notice, right? You understand what I'm getting at? There's a Jerry Springer kind of complaint, and they're going to just get the Jerry Springer-esque kind of people all the time. But the Colin Powells, the influential, the people who have bigger heads and bigger hearts than most people, right? These are the kind of people that people pay attention to. So this is starting to go on among the people. Now, keep in mind, we're still moving here. We're still moving our way towards the land of promise, and they get to the outskirts. Okay, a couple days have passed, and Moses orders a group of 12 men with this attitude that's going on among the people. He orders a group of 12 men to go out and spy the land. Go in there and tell us what this thing looks like. Give us an idea of what it looks like on the ground today and bring back the news. So here's the story they bring back. Numbers chapter 13, if you're, again, you're following along there in the Bible. Numbers 13, we're going to begin in verse 27. He sent them in, and now they have returned. This was their report, these 12 men, to Moses. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land that is flowing with milk and honey. It's a phrase that comes from the Bible, and it's about the land of promise. Here's the kind of fruit it produces. But the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large, and they are fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. We can't go up against them. It says in verse 31. We cannot go up against them. They're stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. There's Jerry Springer kind of complainers, and there's Colin Powell kind of influencers. And they spread this news, this bad report among the people of Israel. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. That's the news flash. It's on the Tribune. It's on the web. It's on CNN.com. It's in every conversation. 10 of the 12 say it's bad news. All the people we saw were huge. They keep going on. Did we mention that we saw giants there? They say it again. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. And that's the way they thought about us too. Interesting they add that. They understand the psychology of the people there. That is the majority report. We feel like grasshoppers when we see ourselves compared. Is there a minority report? The answer is yes. Look at verse 30. But Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. And here's what he says. Think of the tumult that's already been in place. These people are tired, they are thirsty, they are angry, they miss their leeks. They're crabby, and 10 of 12 said, this is nowhere for us to go. And he says, say it out loud with me if you would. Let's go at once to take the land. We can certainly conquer it. Now, we know the story after the fact. 99 out of 100 of us know the end of the story here. So this doesn't seem outrageous. It just seems a little courageous. You'd expect in movies, people really respond to courageous leadership, don't they? In the movies, people rise and respond to the William Wallace-like scenes, don't they? We want freedom! And then everybody in the movie, they go and attack whatever they're attacking, right? That's how it is in all the movies. People press down their fears, they summon their courage, and they win one for the Gipper. That's how it is in all the movies. In real life, something often other than that happens, doesn't it? Numbers 14. The reports come in from the majority report of the 10 and the minority report of the 2. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then the whole community began weeping aloud. And they even go to the point of saying this. Hear this with me. They began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. They cried all night. Men, women, and children. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest